Llegaron los nuevos McCrispy Strips, listos para aventurarse en la mezcla de mayo ketchup, la barbecue que quedó en el fondo de la cajita, Hot Fudge Sundae y en la nueva Creamy Chili McCrispy Strip Dip. Los nuevos McCrispy Strips, ahora en McDonald's. Para pa pa pa.
I'm Stephen Metcalf, and this is the Slate Culture Gabfest, the 3 Blake Lively Problem Edition. It's Wednesday, May 14th, 2025. On today's show, Another Simple Favor is a sequel to the kinky 2018 noir A Simple Favor. This one returns Anna Kendrick and Blake Lively as a pair of frenemies embroiled in a game of cat and mouse. And then Amy Sherman Paladino is probably familiar to our listeners as the showrunner, creator of such beloved hits as Gilmore Girls and The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. She, along with her husband, Daniel Paladino, return with Étoile. I'm told that's French for star. It's a serial dramedy about French and American ballet companies that swap their biggest stars. You can watch it on Amazon Prime. And finally, Holy White Smoke, the New Pope is an American. We discuss with the New York Times journalist Ruth Graham. But first, we're joined by Julia Turner, a fellow at the Annenberg School of Journalism at the University of Southern California. Hey, Julia.
Hello, hello.
And Dana Stevens, the film critic for Slate. Hey, Dana.
Hey, Stephen.
Julia, what does this program and Taylor Swift now have in common?
Being awesome? I don't know. Oh, are we doing Steve, Dana, and Julia's version?
That's exactly right. Explicate.
Okay, we recorded such a great show for y'all last week, and then we had technical difficulties, and we're not able to release it. Though we really liked a lot of the topics we talked about and thought you all might like to hear about them. So this is last week's podcast, Steve, Julia, and Dana's version. And we're doing a re-record with 2 topics from last week and 1 new one because the Pope from Chicago had not yet been selected. Sorry to the New York Times Magazine happiness package. We loved you. No one will ever hear what we said about you or how we feel about happiness in our own lives. The lost tapes, maybe we'll re-record that one in another 5 years. But anyway, hopefully we will keep our conversation fresh and frisky.
And also we're in a polycule with Travis Kelce, but that's neither here nor there. I can't believe you laughed.
I'm laughing in awe at the poorness of that joke, Steve.
It's both of our saddest moments now. Anyway. All right, let's talk about A Simple Favor. The original one, A Simple Favor, came out in 2018. It was a sly, in my estimation, seductive noir with comedic elements featuring the highly synergistic talents of Anna Kendrick and Blake Lively. The two were moms with kids in the same grade, but otherwise they were cut from totally different cloths. Kendrick was the dorky, high-strung mommy vlogger, Lively the lush, plush, stone-cold, equal parts Rita Hayworth and Barbara Stanwyck vamp. When Lively friend seduces Kendrick only to turn her into a fall girl, well, it all added up to great and blessedly unserious fun. Now comes Another Simple Favor. Kendrick is now a true crime vlogger, flogging a nonfiction book based on the events of the first film, when into her reading strolls her old nemesis, recently released from jail. Let's have a listen.
I think about her all the time. The faceless blonde I thought I knew. No photos, no past. A ghost. Was she a glamorous PR executive or a cold-blooded killer?
I'm sorry, the reading started.
I think about her husband, Sean, broken.
You can't go in there.
And her son, Nicky, growing up without a mother.
Hey!
I think about the small role that I played in that sad destiny.
Something that is not audible to you all in that clip is what Blake Lively is wearing, which might be the subtitle of this movie or the marketing slogan, because what Blake Lively is wearing is maybe the best part of it. But in that particular introductory scene, she strolls in a kind of couture terry cloth suit with gray and white ex-convict stripes, an elaborate chain belt, earrings that look like manacles, and then for good measure, rhinestone-studded Louboutin stilettos. I'm not sure what they have to do with the jail theme, but they definitely look dope. So anyhow, it's an on-point, absurd jailbird costume.
That was an awesome description. Thank you. Dana, let's start with you on the film itself. I can't remember whether you liked the first one, but what did you make of this one?
Yeah, we talked about the first one on the show, I believe. I mean, it was hard not to like the first Simple Favor. It had this simplicity about it, even though it had a very twisty plot. There was something about it that was, as you say, Steve, like an old-fashioned noir film in a way, with a classic femme fatale in Blake Lively, except that it had this great female friendship at its center. And as Julia mentioned, incredible costumes by the same costume designer who did both films. Her name is Renee Ehrlich-Kalfus. And I understand why Julia started out by shouting out an outfit as our very first comment on this movie, because in many ways it's a movie for and about clothes horses. And there's just incredibly witty costume design in both of these movies, even though I think only one of them, the first one, has a witty script. Both of them have costumes that explain character, that, you know, establish setting, that just do more work in the case of the sequel, I think, than the movie itself is getting done. So the first Simple Favor, very clever, light, foamy, fun, with a, you know, weird, dark frenemy-ship at its center. The second, also directed by Paul Fieg, often a great director, especially of women, right? Famously the director of Bridesmaids. The second just never took off for me at all as a story. And I think a huge part of why has to do with the tone. This dark tone is really hard to hit, right? Like a noir movie that has kind of a black sense of humor and not necessarily likable characters, but ones that you still somehow are infatuated by, like Blake Lively's Femme Fatale. But if you hit that wrong and it starts to go sour, then you just don't have any footholds of like anyone to root for. And everyone is just mean and nasty. And that started happening to me in Another Simple Favor. I can't really get into why without spoiling, which is why we decided to have a Slate Plus segment where we do get into some of the twists and spoilage of the movie. But I found this movie, the story made no sense and was not really worth following the twists in this time around, and did not have that kind of old-fashioned noir simplicity. And B, there was just too much mockery, including of characters who felt like they were already down and didn't need to be kicked any further. And I can say no more right now. But no, this movie to me felt much longer than its about 2-hour running time, and didn't feel like a necessary sequel that had to be made.
Julia, like a weird, perverted chestnut or a sour misfire? What'd you think?
Because we love perverted chestnuts.
Yeah.
Don't we?
I'm going to table that one. I mean, I think you guys talked about the first one when I was out. And so I had never seen it. So I came into this world cold. And if you don't know what this is, you spend much of the movie being like, what is this? And which relationships are real and which ones like have no emotional weight? Like there's so much good acting. And I think one of my main takeaways, especially after seeing It Ends With Us last summer, is like Blake Lively is an amazing person to watch on screen. Like for all the extra filmic drama surrounding her right now with the Justin Baldoni lawsuit and the, you know, sense of her reputation maybe not being the best, and then the sense that perhaps her reputation is not the best because she's been professionally and expensively smeared, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What I loved about watching this is like, oh, right, well, this woman belongs on a screen. I already knew Anna Kendrick is a smart, fun, sparky, lively presence to watch on screen because I've seen enough other things that she's great in, but I didn't watch any really of the Blake Lively TV origin shows. And just her like leonine, campy, commanding absurdity. She is just strutting around this and having so much fun. And it is so much fun to watch her. Like I did find myself compelled by these two characters and their bizarre connection to each other. But literally everyone else in the movie is emotionally disposable and not in funny ways, like in horrible ways. Like there is a small child who goes through deep trauma, which is just skated across with nary a thought. And it's like, so is that kid real or not? Or how, you know, the kid's there. Like sometimes kids don't matter in a film and then you just don't see them and they're not in the mix. And it's like, oh yeah, so-and-so has kids. I mean, we'll get to that in Étoile. There's some invisible kids that I wonder why they exist. But the kid's right there in front of us, like having a bunch of horrible experiences, and we're supposed to just be like, ha, 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 what a funny punchline. Look what he's doing with his drone. You know, I gather that the ex-husband character also was a more sympathetic fellow and a less pathetic one in the first film. And so I just spent much of the film being like, what the hell is this? Nice outfit. whoa, that was gross. Oh, it's over. That was basically my response.
I can't tell you you're wrong or that I disagree. I mean, it's probably pretty close to my experience of it, but with this difference, which is that something about the first one made me love the sort of Bechdel test passing delight of these two women interacting with each other. And I just want more of it. And it's sort of in that, like, it's be like watching like whatever it was, the sixth or fourth or whatever it was, Nick and Nora Charles, Thin Man movie. It's just, God, you just do anything for a little more William Powell and Myrna Loy, even though the film itself is flimsy. It's like Tracy Hepburn or whatever. And I think, Julia, what you say about Blake Lively, when I saw the first one, I had close to zero associations with her. I knew who she was because she'd been on Gossip Girl, I guess, but I had just nothing else, zero. I went in blank. And she's such a fucking movie star. She just fills the screen. She's both the thing itself and the ironic commentary on the thing. She's so pulpy. She's so sensual. She's so totally in control of her will to power in these movies that you just want more. And of course, you could argue the movie makes an error in giving you, duplicates of her in ways that are preposterous, but it also gives her an excuse to do different kinds of like wildly strange and inappropriate kinds of comedic acting. So in that sense, to me, this is like not a good movie, but it's a very successful taper drug. I really love seeing those two women in those two roles on screen. And the one thing I would say is that it mostly has a sour heart, but there is another spoiler, which we'll talk about in the Plus segment this week, that at least attempted or gestured at something other than heartlessness in the movie. What motivates the Lively character turns out to be something actually quite generous and humane, but I can't argue with you in many ways. There's something really out of control about this movie, and in some respects, just too mean-spirited.
Both movies revolve around this dyad at the center with these two very charismatic actors. I would maybe argue the first one also makes a little more sense narratively because the Anna Kendrick character is the underdog, right? I mean, she's somebody who's desperately trying to be as cool and successful and je ne sais quoi as her new friend crush. Whereas in the second one, she has now become this successful sort of crime vlogger and has a best-selling book and seems like somebody who is more powerful herself. So the dynamic between them maybe shifts in a way that makes it less interesting. But to me, I think the weakness of the movie really resides in all of those supporting characters, not the performances, to be clear, but the writing of those secondary characters. So, for example, the Henry Golding character that Julia Turner mentions is kind of a heartthrob in the first movie. I mean, there's a question as to whether or not he's a lying heartthrob, right? And somebody who is scheming, and that's part of the intrigue of the movie. But he is sort of the juicy, hot husband that the two of them are competing for or both involved with in some way. And to see him suddenly in one of the very first scenes of this new movie as this bitter, washed up drunk who we have to assume has spent the 7 years in between the two movies raising his son on his own while constantly drinking and talking shit about the kid's mother is just, as Julia mentioned earlier, is so depressing that it just takes you out of the movie and makes you not invested in the fate of this character who is, if you care about the first movie at all, you go in thinking, hey, what's become of him, right? And instead you have to sort of witness his degradation. And without spoiling too much, sort of the same thing happens with the Allison Janney character who plays Blake Lively's aunt, who comes in and is so nice that you know she has to have something scheming hidden under her smile. Her part is also just very ungenerously written. Elizabeth Perkins plays the Blake Lively character's mother, replacing Jean Smart, who played that part in the first movie, and just really gets the short end of the stick as well. So there's just something about the universe they're all existing in, which I don't know if we've mentioned is on the Isle of Capri, right? This like glorious vacation destination, an excuse for even more over-the-top costumes than the first movie. But everybody who's running around the island of Capri, kind of undermining each other's sneaky plans, is just such a bad person that I could not bring myself to care.
Yeah, they also keep checking back in on a couple of characters back in Connecticut, which is like, why? Like, why did you bring Andrew Rannells back, but make him stay in Connecticut? Like, if you're going to bring him back, just find, like, it's all so stupid that they're in Capri. Just bring him to Capri, too.
If there's anybody you'd like to go to Capri with in this cast, it's Andrew Rannells, right? He'd be a blast.
Yeah, it's so much firepower gathered, and then it just does not quite function. I do think seeing Blake Lively play multiples is pretty fun. Like, she does get so much to do. But then again, interesting actor, interesting concept, and then the way that it's written and the kind of moral logic just like fails to stick the knife's edge of making it a delicious perverted chestnut. What is it we want it to be? It fails the perverted chestnut test, whatever that may be. I will also say, we've talked a little bit about the Blake Lively costumes, although we have not talked about the Blake Lively hat that could fit all three Blake Lively's under it. But I also really like the attention to detail in costuming Anna Kendrick, both when it's at its most hyper-realist and she's shadowing Blake Lively in kind of a basic girl t-shirt and like a Claire V mom bag, which is, seen on every soccer sideline in my LA momhood, including on my own body. Then, in other party scenes, she's in like incredibly intricately constructed Dolce & Gabbana type like sweeping sundresses, which is like, wait, why do you have both of those outfits? Most people I know have only the first one. But even so, the kind of grandeur and who me girly innocence of those glam looks for the parties are pretty fun.
This seems to me, this may not be the perverted chestnut of my dreams, but definitely like 2 doors into a, transcontinental flight. This one pops up on the headrest screen in front of you. You might walk away kind of satisfied. Anyway, another simple favor, not nearly as fun as the first one or coherent, but, we're not entirely thumbs down on it. Check it out.
This was simply a tragic accident.
I'm not gonna throw you off a cliff, baby.
If there's one thing to learn from the entertainment industry, it's just how easy it is to earn a reputation, even if it doesn't reflect who celebrities really are. For example, everybody thinks that Discover is a card that isn't widely accepted, but in reality, it's accepted at 99% of places that take credit cards nationwide. Yeah, 99%. So maybe now you'll think twice before judging a book by its cover. Unless it's a celebrity cookbook, in that case, judge away. Based on the February 2024 Nielsen report, learn more at discover.com/credit card.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today? Smart choice. Progressive loves to help people make smart choices. And that's why they offer a tool called Auto Quote Explorer that allows you to compare your Progressive car insurance quote with rates from other companies. So you can save time on the research and can enjoy savings when you choose the best rate for you. Give it a try after this episode at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in all states and situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
It's the moment in the show when we talk about business. Our only piece of business this week is to let Slate Plus subscribers know about our Slate Plus segment today, which will show up as a separate episode in your feed. Today, we're going to do one of our patented spoiler special segments about Another Simple Favor, which is one of those twisty noir mysteries that you can't really talk about, especially this particular movie. I feel like we can't get into what we didn't like about it until we get into all the crazy stuff that happened at the ending and really throughout the movie in terms of the story twists. So we will get into those in our Slate Plus segment. If you're a member, you'll get that in your Slate Daily Culture feed. If you're not a member, you can sign up and become one at slate.com/culture plus. When you're a member, you get ad-free podcasts, you get bonus segments like the one I just described, and of course, you get unlimited access to the writing and the podcasting on slate.com. These memberships are a big part of what keeps the show going and the magazine going. So please sign up today at slate.com/culture plus. Once again, that's slate.com/culture plus.
Amy Sherman Paladino is the much-beloved creator and showrunner of Gilmore Girls and Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, and she often co-produces with her husband Daniel. The two of them return to series TV with Étoile, in which 2 venerable ballet companies, one American, one French, swap top talent. It's a stunt to revive their troubled fortunes, and of course, it's a MacGuffin. It allows for multiple fish-out-of-water plot lines. The major one involves 2 formerly romantically linked heads of the respective institutions, Jack, the American, and Geneviève, the French woman. Jack is played by Luke Kirby. He's the artistic director of the New York Metropolitan Ballet. Geneviève is played by the wonderful French actress chanteuse Charlotte Gainsbourg. She is the interim and very much skating on thin ice director of Le Ballet National de Paris. In the clip, they discuss the impending trade. You will hear a third voice. That's the actor David Haig, who plays a kind of deputy artistic director to the American company. Let's listen.
We have to fix this. Our jobs are on the line. Yours, mine, every person in here. Their heads are on the chopping block.
Okay, fine. Big talk. What do we do?
I propose a swap. We trade our top talent. Yours for ours.
Wait a minute.
I'm cautiously intrigued.
Launch a massive transatlantic marketing campaign to bring the audience back to us. Get people interested in dance again. Put fresh faces out there. Maybe do a documentary or a reality show about the swap. Do you like Pink?
The color?
The singer. She can host.
Julia, what'd you make of this?
I took a pass on Maisel, despite being a big fan of Gilmore Girls and the late lamented Bunheads, the one-season ballet show about ballet students that Amy Sherman Paladino made about 10 years ago, or maybe even more. So I was happy to go back into a world where I was not clonked over the head with the leaden badness of Miss Maisel's supposedly marvelous jokes every other line, and to get back into this Patterverse. And I would say that this show has, in the manner of any mature artist, many of the finest Sherman Paladino qualities, a ensemble of delightful weirdos, rat-a-tat dialogue studded with surprising little gems of interesting lines, articulated at a kind of arch, sometimes unrealistic and force-seeming manner that sometimes works and sometimes works less well. Ambition, passion, franticness as hallmark qualities of the characters, maybe a little bit too much flustered klutziness from some of her main characters. She loves a flustered klutz, maybe more than I do. And I think the thing that to me is best about it is the performance of the French Étoile, Lou Delage, who it's her first English-speaking performance, and she absolutely nails it as this tyro, incredible talent, incredible passion, just hurricane of a woman who arrives on New York soil and bends the ballet to her will. It's just a total knockout performance and so delightful. And it feels fresh. It feels sort of more powerful than some of the other characters I've met in the Sherman Paladino verse. And I really loved watching her. So just for that performance alone, I think this is worth checking out if it seems at all up your alley.
Agreed, Julia. I think Lou Delage is the discovery of the show for American audiences. She's so funny. It's hard to describe that character who's, both kind of a grand diva, but also sort of a scruffy rebel who also, wants to get out of the world of ballet, and who's completely unpredictable in every scene, is also completely believable as a dancer, although she, I think like most of the dancer characters, is doubled in the dance scenes. She manages to hold herself and move in a way that you completely believe that she could be the person doing that dance. I have to give a little of my own background of Amy Sherman Paladino and her worlds. It's just slightly different from yours, Julia. I was never able to get into the Gilmore Girls, though I feel like I'm aware of every single plot twist that ever happened in that show, because it's sort of one of those shows like Mad Men that everybody talked about in real time. I believe we did talk about the finale, the very disappointing finale to Gilmore Girls on this podcast. Like you, could not get into Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. It tried so hard. The costumes are amazing. The actors were great. But the supposedly funny comedy of Mrs. Maisel was not funny. And that was what turned me off after one season as well. But unlike you, I think I was I love Bunheads and was so sad about the canceling of Bunheads. That was the big sale point for me on this show. I think another dance show made by Amy Sherman Paladino, who was herself, I believe, trained as a dancer, just has some inherent interest in it because she actually cares about the art of dance. And I wish this show had a little more dancing in it. There are glimpses of rehearsals and little bits of performances, not too many entire pieces until later in the season when they're putting on their galas and the Nutcracker and the things they've been preparing throughout the season. But I do appreciate that the show cares about dancing. It's not just an excuse to have intrigue in the ballet world. It's an actual reason to show people's entire bodies moving through space to music in a way that's really satisfying. I don't think the whole show really comes together, and it actually is losing a bit of energy toward the end of the season as I keep watching it. But I'm going to keep going just because this is a fun world. It's fun to watch Charlotte Gainsbourg looking stylish and striding around Lincoln Center, having breakdowns about her ballet company. And I've come crazily enough to be be invested in the outcome of these two ballet companies. I really want the swap to work and the galas to be profitable. Steve, what about you?
I went in with such high hopes, and there was a lot going for it. I mean, I had a ballet daughter. I'm fascinated by the culture of ballet, and French-English bilingualism in the show is wonderful to listen to. I love how steeped it is in the landmarks of New York high culture, dance specifically, of course, but clearly it's taking place at Lincoln Center, and there's the Steps ballet studio that my daughter occasionally would go to for classes. And I love that it gives this immediate nod. I think it's in the first episode, maybe even the first shot of the whole show. There's a movie marquee, and the theater is playing the Frederick Weissman documentary about ballet. I mean, it's just telling you, I'm going to bring you, we are going to bring you, the Palladinos are going to bring you into this subculture. And then the show itself, it didn't deliver for me, scarcely at all. I found it somewhat exhausting. And I would say that the Palladino style, the pit-patter of the dialogue and the sort of unrelenting cleverness of it is almost intended to be slightly grating, like part of the feeling. It's like pleasingly slightly irritating to have people come at you in that rat-a-tat-tat cutesy cute style. I don't find it uncharming. It didn't work for me here. And I was trying to put my finger on why. And I would say in a show like this, like verisimilitude is not at a huge premium, granted. And yet it also is about entering a world. And even within the conventions, of television dramedy, you want to feel as though you are entering the actual world. And I felt as though this is a show whose entire MacGuffin is that these venerable institutions, scarcely a more exacting art form than ballet and French ballet. And yet the people in charge of running them don't really act plausibly like grown-ups enough, which started to really bug me. This is the quintessentially adult world. And they're in charge of something they think of as it's not just a place where people give money and get a ticket and get to go in and then watch some people dance for a little while. They're like keeping alive an art form, a really in many ways fragile and highly non-commercial art form. And I wanted to feel as though these adults were real and the institutions were real, within which there is something of an inner toddler in all of us, and it will come out in ways that are comically apt. But at the end of the day, I really expected to really enjoy Charlotte Gainsbourg. I thought she was sort of somewhat frenetic and had gotten misplaced in this. But at the end of the day, the Ludelage performance is astonishing. It just makes everything else worth it, I think. But otherwise, I couldn't find myself engrossed.
I think you're totally right that what they're doing with the Luke Kirby and Charlotte Gainsbourg characters is weird. Like, they are both such messes, and they're very messy in running these very rigorous operations with exacting bosses and interesting dynamics around the finances. I actually found the Luke Kirby character more insufferable. I feel like the Charlotte Gainsbourg, she's just so charismatic and so elegantly French that it seems absurd that she's pretending to be this idiot when not an idiot, a smart, passionate leader or whatever, but sort of she's forced to act inelegance a bunch. And she's so clearly elegant that it just seems absurd. Like, she seems like she's a thoroughbred pretending to be a colt or something. Nonetheless, she's so charming, it's fine. It's really the Jack character who just seems like a whiny baby and falls much more to the grating side of the grating, irritating sweetness spectrum. If the other thing was a perverted chestnut, I'm not sure what this is supposed to be. Strawberry dipped in arsenic? I don't know. Anyway, the kind of like, aren't these disorganized grown-ups charming conceit feels a little bit tiresome. It's like the opposite of competence porn or something, which is its own trope. So maybe they're just trying to cut against that cliche. But I agree that it's in those two characters that it feels most off.
Yeah, it's almost like the wrong characters are the main characters. I mean, I will stand up for Charlotte Gainsbourg and say, I think she's not given enough to do, and her part is really underwritten. She should be given a little bit of the action that Lou Delage gets, because nobody has sort of a fierce, outburst better than Charlotte Gainsbourg does, but she doesn't get many chances to do that. So I agree with Julia. If she were written as somebody who was a little more hard-edged and competent, or a lot more, and whose basic struggle wasn't sort of like, why does my suitcase have duct tape wrapped around it or whatever? And, this kind of like flailing ragamuffin that she sometimes appears as, but rather somebody who had trouble stepping down from her, throne of incredible regal competence, that would play more to Charlotte Gainsbourg's strengths.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's like they distributed between Charlotte Gainsbourg and Lou Delage like so starkly, and you want some of that ferocity. I totally agree. Another example is you have a great B plot of the creepy right-wing billionaire, very loosely modeled maybe on the Kochs who fund ballet at the Lincoln Center or some part of Lincoln Center. I can't remember which, just like dubious, call it like blood money behind this exquisite art form. And what do you do with a patron like that? And Callow, the actor playing him in this show, Simon Callow, he's a wonderful English actor who is not only a great actor, but is a wonderful, nuanced essayist for various places like New York Review of Books. His Paul Newman essay is just like a fucking tour de force. Like, he's a brilliant man, and he's playing kind of a boob, which can be done brilliantly, but it's so chompy and at the scenery. It's so broad, and I think it has to be that broad because of the way it's written, but it shouldn't have been written that broad. This is a really interesting dilemma that an intelligent comedy could absolutely take on in ways that were subtle and kind of, weirdly thrilling as a peek behind the scenes, and they didn't take the opportunity.
It is fun whenever he shows up on screen, though. Like, he is written broad, and there's a version of it that's much more subtle. Like, if you read the Patrick Radden Keefe book, Empire of Pain, about the Sacklers, among the marvelous parts of that book are sort of the actual human impulse to feel like maybe you are doing good in the world, even when your money comes from someplace so bad. Like, there's a much more subtle version of that. I'm not going to, his chompingness was only delightful to me. I do think there are some critics who've read that character and plotline as a perhaps commentary on the nature of making art about ballet for Amazon and being funded by Jeff Bezos in their desire to keep their rat-a-tat patter on screen. I will say, with regard to Gainsbourg, as the show goes on, I think I've now watched 7, you do get to see more ballets, and the show really gives us the courage of its convictions. We see an original piece supposedly choreographed by the goofy, socially awkward choreographer, Tobias Bell, who we haven't mentioned. We get to see that whole piece. So it is doing the version of Maisel of showing us the art. I think luckily for them, most people are so illiterate about dance that it's like, all right, that plausibly looks like a good ballet from the new guy. I don't know. Certainly I am illiterate enough about dance to be like, all right, that seems all right. And then there's another show of his that gets a bad reception from the French press, and we get to see a little bit of that. It gets into the more technical details of ballet as it goes on and shows us more ballet as it goes on, which I think is a strength. And we do get to see Gainsbourg becoming a bit more defiant as she navigates those challenges and ditching her flustered middle manager shtick and defending the art form she loves and the dancers who do it with bravery and elan. And I haven't watched all the way to the end yet, but I feel like she gets to do a little bit more as the show goes on.
Well, that makes me want to keep watching, Julia. I mean, something I will say about this show is I don't require it to be perfect to enjoy it pleasantly unspooling before my eyes. And I do plan to finish the first season, in part because I like watching the dance and Lou Delage, and in part just because I don't hate this world. It's fun to see something that unfolds behind the scenes in a world as different and exotic and exciting as ballet. So yeah, I'm with it.
I wish I were more with it, but I think I'll probably go back to it. All right, it's Étoile. It's on Amazon Prime. Check it out.
You don't compromise. It's the reason I wanted to do this.
Can you believe that's just a rehearsal?
Again, I did it exactly like you said. I did whoosh, 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 whoosh. Skip the whoosh. I did not skip the whoosh. You did.
I'm Nomi Fry.
I'm Vincent Cunningham.
I'm Alex Schwartz, and we are Critics at Large, a podcast from The New Yorker. Guys, what do we do on the show every week?
We look into the startling maw of our culture and try to figure something out.
That's right. We take something that's going on in the culture now. Maybe it's a movie, maybe it's a book, maybe it's just kind of a trend.
And we expand it across culture as kind of a pattern or a template.
Join us on Critics at Large from The New Yorker. New episodes drop every Thursday. Follow wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey, it's Anna Sale, host of Death, Sex, and Money from Slate. Our tagline is the things we think about a lot and need to talk about more. And for the most part, as a culture generally, we are getting more comfortable talking about mental health. But if you fly airplanes for a living, or even as a hobby, that may not be the case. That's because if a pilot gets a mental health diagnosis, there is a good chance they'll get their license suspended. In a recent episode, we talked to pilots, aspiring pilots, and medical professionals about whether rigid rules around mental fitness in aviation are necessary for public safety, or if they push people who are suffering to stay silent.
It's an overarching thing in the world of aviation that if you have something wrong with you, dear God, do not disclose it to the FAA because they will take your license and they will take your life.
Listen to this episode and more Death, Sex, and Money episodes wherever you get podcasts.
Growing up, the Pope seemed to me, even a non-believer raised in a Protestant household, like an otherworldly figure, a figure of just unparalleled authority in the world, really. It was Pope John Paul, of course, who was vocal on the issue of anti-communism and various other issues. This was a otherworldly figure and a worldly figure at once, mediating temporal human affairs and eternity, presumably on all our behalf. And now the Pope is a nice guy from Chicago. To discuss this, we're joined by Ruth Graham, who covers religion, faith, and values for the New York Times. Ruth, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much.
Let's start someplace really simple. What was your reaction to this news?
Well, I don't know if I can say it on a podcast, a family podcast.
We're not a family podcast.
Yes, thankfully, we're not a family podcast.
Well, I was very shocked, to put it delicately. He was on the list of potential finalists and had read a little bit about him, but it has been considered just impossible that the cardinals at the conclave would ever select an American pope. That even though the former Robert Prevost had this sterling resume that lines him up sort of perfectly for this role, the fact that he is from America was just, that he wouldn't make it to the final, so to speak. So I was completely shocked. And then it turns out he's from the south side of Chicago. It's just an incredible, as you said, it's this resume of the perfect Vatican resume combined with a guy who's been to Aurelio's Pizza in Homewood is just a wild, wild combination. So he's not a hugely influential name. He's not, one of the cardinals of the big diocese in the US. So he's not even someone who has been terribly prominent, even for sort of Catholic watchers or Catholics themselves in the country. He's not a household name at all, unlike someone like, Cardinal Dolan in New York. So even that piece of it too, it's just really shocking and exciting, I should say.
Is the familiarity that we have with what it means to be a guy from Chicago the same thing that's been experienced by people in other countries when their countrymen have become the Pope? Or is there something about the era we're living in where we just have more visibility into other people's lives, where we're like, oh, there he was at the World Series, and here's this woman who claims she knew him in high school? The kind of availability of non-elevated information about him is so striking and sort of makes me both more interested in the Pope and also a little bit no, Pope, go back up on that hill and be special. Don't be a normal guy.
I don't want to know about your tweets.
Yeah.
So I think it's both. When Pope Francis from Argentina or John Paul II from Poland, that electrifies their home countries for sure. And so there's always this moment of national pride and identification when a new Pope is named. So I don't think that piece of it is new. I think since we're experiencing it, it just feels so present and fresh to us because all those references are someone who knows someone who knows someone who knows the Pope is a wild experience. Just even hearing him speak in his Chicago accent and the clip of him calling his brother and being caught on tape being why didn't you pick up your phone? The Pope saying that is just amazing. But then I think we just know more and quicker about him because of the internet. He's a younger Pope who has been online and been in photos and been at the Sox games and captured there. And so it's interesting. He hasn't given a lot of interviews. It's not like he has been this super high profile guy, but everyone has their kind of trail of life dragging behind them in the era we live in.
Ruth, we've talked about his Chicago-ness, which is a very endearing feature of this Pope to Americans, but I was really struck reading about him and the surprise of his being chosen at all the different communities and histories and languages that he's identified with. Can you talk about the other things this Pope represents besides hot dogs and White Sox games?
Yeah, it's such an American story. It's really incredible. So he was born and raised on the south side of Chicago. His mother, who was born in Chicago, but her maiden name was Martinez, and her family ancestry, she has roots in Black Creole culture in New Orleans. Her father's birth certificate lists him being born in the Dominican Republic. The family doesn't seem to know a lot about their own, that it's not part of their family identity, which is interesting, but he's been instantly claimed by New Orleans residents as well. And then even just the institutions he's moved through, he did his undergrad in math at Villanova. And so there's these different parts of the country that he's studied and spent time in, not to mention all that time in Peru as a missionary priest and a bishop there. So he's definitely moved through and touched a lot of communities. So there's many feelings of ownership coming from all over the world for him.
Ruth, I have to ask, obviously it's always a big deal when there's a new pope and people look for the smoke and it's covered. It feels more electrified right now, and I'm sure that's in part because he's American. Is part of it also because a bunch of us just watched the movie Conclave, and the question of what is happening inside that building is more imaginable to us because we just saw Ralph Fiennes do it?
I actually do think so, yes. I mean, I think an American pope would have been absolutely electrifying no matter what, but having some sense, some glimpse of that process and a feel for it from everyone watching it. Even before Leo was named, I think there was a sort of a surprising amount of interest in the process itself. And that has to be. I was flying to Chicago frantically. So he was named pope on Thursday afternoon, I guess. And I ran to the airport. I felt like I was in a movie. I'm grabbing my stuff and running out the door to go there. And then on the plane, the guy in front of me was watching Conclave. And I was everyone's kind of boning up on this. I was not only not in the Sistine Chapel, but not in Rome covering this. But my sense is that is a pretty accurate representation just of the process itself. So watch Conclave if you haven't.
Well, even just the coverage, the sense that beforehand we were thinking about who the big contenders were. I don't really remember much beyond waiting for the white smoke. We'll see what those guys decide.
Yeah, that's right. There's always a little bit of trying to game it out because there was a sense that Francis was a little bit of a surprise too. So I think Vatican watchers are always doing that, but maybe there was sort of more popular attention to it this time.
We know also, as in Conclave, there were a lot of political undercurrents that seemed to be flowing through the choice of this particular pope. And I had not realized until reading up a bit in order to talk to you that the Catholic Church has this rightward movement in the past generation that's sort of, that's taking them back to a place that's more like John Paul II, who Steve mentioned, rather than somebody like Pope Francis, the pope who just died, who was for a pope on the progressive side. I wonder, can you talk about the political associations behind choosing this particular pope?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, he is broadly seen as someone in the model of Francis, but we really don't know what that will mean for him as a leader. So, even if he sort of broadly shares Francis's ideas about the future of the church, that doesn't mean that he'll have the same appetite for kind of sparring with the conservatives in the American church or for tossing off these thoughts about LGBTQ issues and things like that. So you could be pretty much in line with Francis in a lot of ways and end up being a very different pope, at least in terms of kind of the public understanding and public image. So I want to say that up front because we just don't know how he will govern and lead. But that said, as you mentioned, yes, the American church in particular is quite conservative. That certainly doesn't mean everyone in the pews, but the bishops' conference is quite conservative, relative to other countries. And there is a real stream of conservative Catholicism in the US that's very energized. I was going to say energized now, that maybe that's energized as of last week, and we'll see how they feel going forward. But, if you think about someone like J.D. Vance compared to someone like Joe Biden, so younger, Vance is a convert. I don't know quite if I'd call him a traditionalist, he's not a Latin mass guy, but he's more sympathetic to sort of that wing and direction of the church. And so, yeah, that's been sort of a very active, energized wing of American Catholicism. And it'll be so interesting to have this potentially very different kind of model of American Christian and Catholic power in the world in Leo.
Can I ask, the long-standing presumption that there would never be an American pope had to do with the present dominance of America on the world scene. Are there people who read this as an indication of conclusion that America's time as a dominant force is over? America is so clearly on the wane that we can afford to have an American pope?
I love that question. I don't think so. And in fact, When the American cardinals who were part of the conclave came out and gave their press conference after Leo's selection, they were really downplaying Leo's Americanness as a factor in the choice. So it was really like, oh, he has this global experience, all this experience in Peru, this experience at the Vatican, trying to kind of frame him more as a global choice and not as like the American Pope.
Well, Ruth, thanks so much for coming onto the show and talking to us about an American Pope and all the nuances therein. And I'd like to commend you for holding on to your faith, values, and religion when saying that you were quote unquote shocked, as opposed to saying it like XXX, whatever. That was very restrained.
Gotta keep it clean.
That's much appreciated. Thanks for coming on. I hope we talk to you again.
Thanks, Ruth.
Thank you.
What happens if and or when the Trump administration defies the Supreme Court? Well, it's already happening.
The Trump administration is reading this as a license to dawdle longer in its half-hearted effort to comply with an edict from SCOTUS.
I'm Dahlia Lithwick. I host Amicus, Slate's podcast about the courts, the law, and the Supreme Court. Our recent episode examined how the Supreme Court's attempts to save face and de-escalate the constitutional crisis may be running out of road.
This is not a game of chicken where we back down from the Constitution. Like, that's not how this works.
What happens when the executive branch goes to war with the courts? We're about to find out. Listen to new episodes of Amicus every Saturday. Find us by searching Amicus wherever you listen to podcasts.
All right, now is the moment in our podcast when we endorse. Dana, what do you have?
Steve, here's a moment where the lost tapes come into play from last week, because I really, really wanted to endorse the movie that I endorsed last week and was sad not to be able to hit the moment when that movie opened wide across the country. But I presumably now it is out there in some theaters, and I get to endorse the movie April, which is one of my favorite films I've seen this year. It's a movie from Georgia, the country of Georgia, not the state, directed by a young woman. It's her second film, named Déa Kulumbegashvili. I know I'm saying her name correctly, although it has many syllables, because I interviewed her a couple times the weekend that the movie opened in New York a couple weeks ago. She was fascinating, in my opinion, a really brilliant up-and-coming director. So April is set in a rural region of Georgia, and it's about an OBGYN who by day is delivering babies in a clinic, and by night and on her spare time, she goes around through the nearby villages giving abortions to women in the villages who need them. Georgia, as a note, and I didn't know this until researching the movie, is a place where abortion is legal, but as in many places around the world, it's so stigmatized that, many people will not get one anyway. So it's sort of a story of that. But that description makes this sound like a movie that you might be familiar with, sort of a social realist indie type of film. And it is very far from that. It really does feel like a European art film, almost in the tradition of like Bellatar, if you know that Hungarian director. It moves very, very slowly, but with a beautiful kind of regal pace. It's not at all boring. But it, makes a lot of use of silence. There are sort of psychological horror elements because there's a sort of fantasy character who it's not clear whether that's sort of the inner self of this very tormented protagonist. It's spooky and beautiful and haunting, and something that I immediately wanted to see again after watching it, and did in fact watch a second time. So take a look and see if April is showing anywhere near you. It's not on streaming yet, but it is showing in several cities across the country, and will, I'm sure, be coming to streaming at some point this summer.
Oh, wow. That sounds really amazing. Julia, what do you have?
Well, as our regular listeners know, my family and I are habitués of the various marvelous rep theaters around Los Angeles, repertory cinemas. And we went with my sons and my mother a couple weeks ago to see The French Connection at the Arrow on Montana, a venue that the Culture Gabfest has played, in fact. And I hadn't seen it in about 20 years. It was part of a Gene Hackman retrospective. And although I know I get teased on this show for saying things like, oh, that film Chinatown is pretty good, that movie, The French Connection, is pretty good, and quite a car chase in it, like... But it really is just incredibly shot and so arresting and really interesting to watch it with a woman nearing 80 and two boys in their tweens. Like the pacing of it really works multi-generationally. And in the course of reading a little bit more about it afterwards, I came upon this essay by Keith Phipps, a terrific critic and film writer, on a Substack called The Reveal.
Oh, love The Reveal.
I didn't know about it. And it's run by former editors of The Dissolve, the late lamented film site. But he wrote about something I didn't know about, which is that as they've been issuing The French Connection digitally, they have cut 6 seconds of it early on in the film when Gene Hackman's character, Popeye Doyle, uses a racial slur. And Phipps has a really excellent explication of why this fails the film, turns the film from one that is aware of and commenting on the Doyle character's racism to one that almost becomes slightly racist itself. And it's just a terrific essay about this bowdlerization. So I would point you to the essay by Keith Phipps on The Reveal. And then I would say, hey, I bet that the Arrow is not the only repertory cinema in America doing a Gene Hackman retrospective. So keep an eye out for an opportunity to see The French Connection in its full format in a theater near you. Because if you try to see it on streaming, you won't see the whole thing.
Well, in our last show, I produced a lost tapes moment myself, which is that Julia, I believe, if I can reconstruct it a little bit, was talking about happiness and something about chopping onions and a kind of zen, maybe, Julia, or...
Yeah, or a groundingness. I always find chopping onions to be like a beautiful return to the miracle of being alive. I don't know, they're just so geometric and gorgeous, and they make everything delicious, and they make you cry, and I don't know, I love chopping onions.
Have you ever done that trick where you chew mint gum while you chop an onion?
No, the one I've done currently, because I've gotten much more sensitive to it, I think since I stopped wearing contact lenses so much, which actually serve as a buffer, is you hold a matchstick between your teeth.
Maybe
Really?
holding anything works, because the thing I read about that I usually do is have a piece of bread in my mouth, or I just sort of snack on bread as I'm chopping the onions. But maybe it's just the act of having something in your mouth that makes you not cry.
That is all very fascinating. I'm going to try all of it. Well, for some reason, in the moment last week, I called an audible, and what Julia was saying reminded me of a poem by Adrienne Rich called Peeling Onions, though it's kind of the opposite. It's about, well, anyway, let me read it. It's a very short poem, and it's one of my favorite by her. Peeling onions, only to have a grief equal to all these tears. There's not a sob in my chest. Dry-hearted as Peer Gynt, I pare away, no hero, merely a cook. Crying was labor once when I'd good cause. Walking, I felt my eyes like wounds raw in my head. So postal clerks, I thought, must stare. A dog's look, a cat's burnt to my brain. Yet all that stayed stuffed in my lungs like smog. These old tears in the chopping bowl. Anyway, what a just yet another astonishing example of how powerfully you can condense meaning into such a small space if you have the virtuosic gift, and she definitely did.
I love Adrienne Rich. I did a project in college that I'm just remembering where I read all of her. I mean, that's the thing about a poet, too. You can be a completist pretty easily unless they're insanely prolific. It's pretty fun to read someone's whole work, which I did once with her. And she's just so marvelous.
Yeah, that must be amazing to work your way through all of it. Julia, thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Dana. That was fun.
Yeah, good show for a second time.
Yeah, you'll find links to some of the things we talked about this week at our show page. That's slate.com/culturefest. And you can email us at culturefest@slate.com. Our introductory music is by the composer Nicholas Pertel. Our production assistant is Daniel Hirsch, and our producer is Jessamine Molly. For Dana Stevens and Julia Turner, I'm Stephen Metcalf. Thank you so much for joining us. We will see you soon.
In honor of Military Appreciation Month, Verizon thought of a lot of different ways we could show our appreciation, like rolling out the red carpet, giving you your own personal marching band, or throwing a bumping shindig. At Verizon, we're doing all that in the form of special military offers. That's why, this month only, we're giving military and veteran families a $200 Verizon gift card and a phone on us, with a select trade-in and a new line on select unlimited plans. Think of it as our way of flying a squadron of jets overhead while launching fireworks. Now that's what we call a celebration, because we're proud to serve you. Visit your local Verizon store to learn more. $200 Verizon gift card requires smartphone purchase $799.99 or more with new line on eligible plan. Gift card sent within 8 weeks after receipt of claim. Phone offer requires $799.99 purchase with new smartphone line on Unlimited Ultimate or Postpaid Unlimited Plus. Minimum plan $80 a month with autopay plus taxes and fees for 36 months. Less $800 trade-in or promo credit applied over 36 months. 0% APR. Trade-in must be from Apple, Google, or Samsung. Trade-in and additional terms apply.